Fear is one of the most primal and universal human experiences, a force that has shaped history, philosophy, and culture. At its core, fear is a response to perceived threats, whether real or imagined. Biologically, it's rooted in the brain's amygdala, triggering the fight-or-flight response that has kept humans alive for millennia. Yet, fear is more than just a survival mechanism. It's a complex emotion that reveals our vulnerabilities and shapes our understanding of the world. Philosophically, fear has long been a subject of fascination. Aristotle saw it as a response to impending evil, while Thomas Hobbes believed fear of violence and death was the foundation of social order. Søren Kierkegaard took a different approach, viewing fear, or anxiety, as a gateway to self-awareness. For Kierkegaard, the dread of freedom and the unknown forces us to confront our choices and our humanity. Fear, in this sense, isn't just something to avoid. It's a profound teacher. Historically, fear has played a pivotal role in shaping societies. In ancient civilizations, fear of the gods and the afterlife drove religious rituals and monumental projects like the pyramids. During the Middle Ages, fear of divine judgment and witchcraft fueled events like the Inquisition and witch trials. In the modern era, fear has been used as a political tool, from Cold War propaganda to the anxieties of the digital age, where misinformation and surveillance create new forms of dread. Culturally, fear has inspired some of humanity's most enduring art and stories. Gothic literature, like Frankenstein and Dracula, explores the darker sides of human nature, while horror films tap into universal fears of the unknown and the uncontrollable. Dystopian narratives, such as 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale, use fear to critique societal trends and warn of potential futures. These stories resonate because they reflect our deepest anxieties of oppression, loss of freedom, and the erosion of identity. In the digital age, fear has taken on new forms. Social media and 24-hour news cycles amplify anxieties, creating a culture of doom-scrolling and polarization. Yet, fear also reminds us of our shared humanity. It's a mirror that reflects our vulnerabilities and our resilience. By confronting fear, we can better understand ourselves and the world around us. Fear isn't just a challenge. It's a companion on the journey of life, teaching us to navigate uncertainty and find meaning in the face of adversity.
Existential fear is not about the immediate dangers of life, but the profound anxieties that arise from confronting existence itself. At its core, it's the fear of meaninglessness, the dread of freedom, and the struggle to define our identity in an uncertain world. This concept lies at the heart of existentialist philosophy, which grapples with the human condition in all its complexity and ambiguity. Søren Kierkegaard, often considered the father of existentialism, was one of the first to explore this kind of fear. He distinguished between ordinary fear, like fear of a specific threat, and what he called anxiety or dread. For Kierkegaard, anxiety arises from the awareness of our freedom and the infinite possibilities it entails. In his work, The Concept of Anxiety, he describes this as the dizziness of freedom, the unsettling realization that we are responsible for our choices and their consequences. This anxiety, while terrifying, is also a gateway to self-awareness. It forces us to confront the uncertainty of existence and the weight of our own decisions. Kierkegaard believed that embracing this fear, rather than running from it, was essential to living an authentic life. Jean-Paul Sartre, another towering figure in existentialism, took this idea further. In his view, Human beings are condemned to be free. We are thrust into a world without inherent meaning or purpose, and it is up to us to create our own. This freedom, however, is not liberating. It's overwhelming. Sartre argued that the fear of this responsibility often leads to bad faith, where individuals deceive themselves into believing they are not free, clinging to roles, routines, or societal expectations to avoid the burden of choice. For Sartre, existential fear is the price of authenticity. It's the recognition that we are alone in creating our identity, with no external authority or predetermined path to guide us. The fear of meaninglessness is another central theme in existential thought. In a universe without inherent purpose, the search for meaning can feel futile. Albert Camus, though not strictly an existentialist, captured this struggle in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. He describes the human condition as akin to Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down, an endless, seemingly meaningless task. Camus argues that the only way to confront this absurdity is to embrace it, to find joy and defiance in the struggle itself. The fear of meaninglessness, then, becomes a call to create our own meaning, even in the face of an indifferent universe. Existential fear also touches on the struggle for identity. In a world where traditional roles and beliefs are increasingly questioned, the question, "Who am I?" becomes both urgent and elusive. This fear is not just about external expectations, but the internal conflict of defining oneself in a fragmented, ever-changing world. Philosophers like Martin Heidegger and Simone de Beauvoir expanded on this, exploring how fear and anxiety are tied to our relationships with others and our own mortality. Heidegger's concept of being toward death emphasizes that the awareness of our finitude shapes how we live and who we become. Ultimately, existential fear is not something to be overcome, but something to be understood. It reveals the depth of our freedom, the weight of our choices, and the challenge of creating meaning in an uncertain world. For existentialists, this fear is not a weakness, but a call to authenticity. It pushes us to confront the fundamental questions of existence. Who are we? What do we value? And how do we live in the face of life's inherent uncertainties? In embracing these questions, we find not answers, but the courage to live fully and authentically. Fear and freedom are deeply intertwined, often locked in a tension that shapes how we live and make choices. On one hand, freedom is the ability to act, think, and choose without constraint. On the other, fear can act as an invisible chain, limiting our autonomy and steering us away from the very possibilities that freedom offers. Philosophers have long grappled with this dynamic, exploring how fear influences our decisions and what it means to live authentically in the face of it. At its core, fear constrains freedom by narrowing our perception of what is possible. When we are afraid, our focus shifts to survival and safety, often at the expense of exploration and growth. This is evident in everyday life. Fear of failure might stop someone from pursuing a dream. Fear of rejection might prevent them from forming meaningful connections, and fear of the unknown might keep them trapped in routines that feel secure but unfulfilling. In this way, fear doesn't just limit our actions, it limits our imagination, closing off paths we might otherwise take. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre have explored this relationship in depth. Sartre argued that human beings are condemned to be free, meaning we are inherently free to make choices, but this freedom comes with immense responsibility. Fear, in Sartre's view, often leads to bad faith, a state where individuals deceive themselves into believing they are not free. For example, someone might blame their circumstances, their upbringing, or societal expectations for their choices, refusing to acknowledge their own agency. In doing so, they surrender their freedom to fear, allowing it to dictate their lives rather than embracing the uncertainty and responsibility that come with autonomy. Soren Kierkegaard also examined the interplay between fear and freedom, though from a slightly different angle. He saw fear, or what he called anxiety, as a necessary part of the human experience. For Kierkegaard, anxiety arises from the awareness of our freedom and the infinite possibilities it presents. This dizziness of freedom can be paralyzing, as the sheer scope of our choices overwhelms us. Yet, Kierkegaard believed that confronting this fear was essential to living authentically. By embracing the anxiety of freedom, we can move beyond the safety of conformity and make choices that reflect our true selves. Fear also plays a significant role in political philosophy, particularly in discussions about power and control. Thomas Hobbes, for instance, argued that fear is the foundation of social order. In his view, the fear of violence and chaos drives individuals to surrender some of their freedom to a governing authority in exchange for security. While this might create stability, it also raises questions about the cost of such a trade-off. How much freedom are we willing to give up to feel safe? And who decides what we should fear? In the modern world, fear continues to shape our choices in subtle and pervasive ways. The rise of social media and 24-hour news cycles amplifies anxieties, creating a culture of fear that influences everything from personal decisions to political movements. Fear of the other, fear of change, and fear of the future often drive people toward authoritarianism, conformity, or isolation. Yet, as philosophers like Hannah Arendt have pointed out, fear can also be a tool for manipulation, used by those in power to control populations and suppress dissent. Ultimately, the relationship between fear and freedom is a complex one. Fear can constrain us, but it can also challenge us to confront our limitations and push beyond them. The key lies in awareness, recognizing when fear is guiding our choices and deciding whether to let it. As existentialists like Sartre and Kierkegaard remind us, true freedom isn't the absence of fear, but the courage to act in spite of it. It's about embracing the uncertainty of choice, taking responsibility for our actions, and refusing to let fear dictate the boundaries of our lives. Fear is a universal human experience, but not all fears are created equal. Philosophers have long sought to understand the nature of fear, particularly the distinction between rational and irrational fears. Rational fears are those grounded in real, immediate threats, like the fear of a snarling dog or an oncoming car. These fears are adaptive, helping us survive by triggering the fight-or-flight response. Irrational fears, on the other hand, are disproportionate or disconnected from actual danger, like the fear of heights when standing on a stable balcony, or the fear of public speaking, despite no real risk of harm. Understanding this distinction is key to exploring how fear shapes our lives and choices. Philosophers have approached this divide in various ways. Aristotle, for instance, saw fear as a response to perceived evil or harm. In his view, rational fear arises when there is a clear and present danger, while irrational fear stems from misjudgment or imagination. For example, fearing a lion in the wild is rational, but fearing a lion in a securely locked zoo is irrational. Aristotle believed that understanding the source of fear, whether real or imagined, was crucial to managing it. He argued that courage lies not in the absence of fear, but in responding appropriately to it, balancing between recklessness and cowardice. The Stoics took a different approach, emphasizing the role of reason in overcoming fear. They believed that irrational fears arise from false beliefs and misplaced values. For example, the fear of death is irrational because death itself is neither good nor bad. It is simply a natural part of life. By cultivating rationality and self-control, the Stoics argued, we can free ourselves from irrational fears and live with greater peace of mind. Epictetus, a prominent Stoic philosopher, famously said, "It is not things themselves that disturb people, but their judgments about things." In other words, it is our perception of danger, not the danger itself, that fuels fear. Existentialist philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard and Jean-Paul Sartre delved deeper into the psychological and existential dimensions of fear. Kierkegaard distinguished between fear, which has a specific object, and anxiety, which is a more diffuse and existential dread. He saw anxiety as a fundamental part of the human condition, arising from the awareness of our freedom and the infinite possibilities it entails. While this anxiety can feel irrational, Kierkegaard believed it was essential to self-awareness and growth. Sartre, on the other hand, focused on how fear can constrain freedom. He argued that irrational fears often lead to bad faith, where individuals deceive themselves into believing they are not free, allowing fear to dictate their choices rather than embracing their autonomy. Modern philosophers have expanded on these ideas, exploring how cultural and societal factors shape our fears. Martha Nussbaum, for example, examines the role of fear in politics and ethics. She argues that irrational fears are often exploited by those in power to manipulate public opinion and justify harmful policies. Fear of the other, whether based on race, religion, or ideology, can lead to discrimination and violence. Nussbaum emphasizes the importance of critical thinking and empathy in overcoming these irrational fears and building a more just society. Ultimately, the distinction between rational and irrational fear is not just an intellectual exercise. It has profound implications for how we live our lives. Rational fears protect us, while irrational fears can imprison us, limiting our potential and distorting our perception of the world. By understanding the nature of fear, we can better navigate its complexities, distinguishing between what truly threatens us and what merely holds us back. As philosophers have shown, the key lies in cultivating reason, self-awareness, and courage, allowing us to face our fears, both rational and irrational, with clarity and purpose. Fear has long played a complex and controversial role in ethics, shaping how individuals and societies approach moral decision-making. On one hand, fear can act as a powerful motivator, steering people away from harmful actions and toward behaviors that align with ethical norms. On the other, relying on fear as a moral guide raises questions about authenticity, autonomy, and the true nature of virtue. Philosophers have debated this tension for centuries, exploring whether fear is a legitimate foundation for ethical behavior or merely a tool for control. One of the earliest and most influential perspectives on fear in ethics comes from religion. Many religious traditions use fear of divine punishment as a motivator for moral behavior. In Christianity, for example, the fear of hell and the hope of heaven have historically been used to encourage adherence to moral laws. Similarly, in Islam, the concept of taqwa, often translated as fear of God, emphasizes mindfulness and piety as safeguards against sin. While this approach can effectively promote ethical behavior, critics argue that it reduces morality to a transactional relationship, where actions are motivated by self-interest rather than genuine virtue. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant offer a different perspective. Kant's deontological ethics focuses on duty and the intrinsic worth of moral actions rather than their consequences. For Kant, acting out of fear, whether fear of punishment or fear of negative outcomes, undermines the moral value of an action. True ethical behavior, he argues, must arise from respect for the moral law itself, not from external pressures or incentives. In this view, fear may lead to compliance, but it cannot produce genuine moral integrity. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, takes a more pragmatic approach. Philosophers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill argue that the morality of an action depends on its consequences, particularly its contribution to overall happiness. From this perspective, fear can be a legitimate motivator if it leads to outcomes that maximize well-being. For example, fear of legal consequences might deter crime, creating a safer and more harmonious society. However, utilitarians also recognize the limitations of fear. If fear leads to excessive control or stifles individual freedom, it can undermine the very happiness it seeks to promote. Existentialist thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir challenge the idea of fear as a moral motivator altogether. They argue that true ethical behavior requires authenticity and the courage to confront uncertainty. Sartre, for instance, emphasizes that individuals must take full responsibility for their choices, free from external influences like fear or societal pressure. Acting out of fear, in his view, is a form of bad faith, a denial of one's freedom and a betrayal of one's true self. For existentialists, ethics is not about following rules or avoiding punishment, but about creating meaning and living authentically in the face of life's inherent uncertainties. Modern ethicists like Martha Nussbaum further explore the role of fear in moral and political contexts. Nussbaum argues that fear, while a natural emotion, can be manipulated to justify unethical actions, such as discrimination, violence, or authoritarianism. She emphasizes the importance of cultivating empathy and critical thinking to counteract the destructive effects of fear. In her view, a just society must address the root causes of fear, such as insecurity and inequality, rather than exploiting it for control. Ultimately, the role of fear in ethics is a double-edged sword. While it can motivate ethical behavior and protect societal order, it can also undermine autonomy, authenticity, and genuine moral growth. The challenge lies in striking a balance, acknowledging the power of fear while striving to act from a place of reason, empathy, and respect for the moral law. As philosophers have shown, true ethical behavior is not about avoiding fear, but about transcending it, choosing to do what is right, not because we are afraid, but because it is who we are. Fear is a universal human emotion, but how it is understood, expressed, and managed varies widely across cultures. These differences are shaped by historical, religious, and societal narratives that define what is feared, why it is feared, and how fear should be confronted. By examining these cultural perspectives, we can gain insight into how fear is not just a personal experience, but a collective one, deeply intertwined with the values and beliefs of a community. In many traditional societies, fear is often linked to the spiritual or supernatural. For example, in many indigenous cultures, fear is closely tied to the natural world and the unseen forces that govern it. The fear of offending spirits or disrupting the balance of nature can lead to rituals and practices designed to appease these forces. In this context, fear is not just an individual emotion, but a communal responsibility, reminding people of their connection to the environment and the sacred. Similarly, in Hinduism, fear of karma, the moral law of cause and effect, shapes ethical behavior, encouraging individuals to act in ways that align with cosmic order. In contrast, Western cultures have often framed fear in more secular and psychological terms. The Enlightenment emphasized reason and control, leading to a view of fear as something to be overcome through knowledge and science. This perspective is evident in the works of philosophers like René Descartes and John Locke, who saw fear as a primitive emotion that could be mastered through rational thought. However, this focus on overcoming fear has also led to a cultural narrative that stigmatizes vulnerability, often portraying fear as a sign of weakness rather than a natural response to uncertainty. Religious traditions also play a significant role in shaping cultural attitudes toward fear. In Christianity, fear of divine judgment has historically been used to encourage moral behavior, as seen in the concept of hell and the Last Judgment. Yet, Christianity also offers narratives of hope and redemption, framing fear as a temporary state that can be transcended through faith. In Buddhism, fear is seen as a product of attachment and ignorance. The path to liberation involves confronting and understanding fear, not as an enemy, but as a teacher that reveals the impermanent nature of existence. Societal narratives further shape individual fears by defining what is considered threatening or taboo. For example, in collectivist cultures, fear of social ostracism or dishonor can be a powerful motivator, influencing behavior to align with group norms. In Japan, the concept of haji, shame, reflects this cultural emphasis on social harmony and the fear of bringing disgrace to oneself or one's family. Similarly, in many Western societies, fear of failure or inadequacy is often tied to individualistic values that prioritize success and self-reliance. Media and technology also play a crucial role in shaping cultural fears. In the modern world, globalized media amplifies certain fears, such as terrorism, pandemics, or climate change, while downplaying others. These narratives can create a sense of collective anxiety, influencing how individuals perceive risk and make decisions. For example, the constant stream of negative news can lead to a phenomenon known as mean world syndrome, where people overestimate the dangers of their environment, even if their personal experiences suggest otherwise. Ultimately, cultural perspectives on fear reveal how deeply this emotion is embedded in the stories we tell about ourselves and the world. These narratives not only define what we fear, but also how we respond to it, whether through rituals, reason, faith, or collective action. By understanding these cultural dimensions, we can better appreciate the diversity of human experience and the ways in which fear, while universal, is also profoundly shaped by the societies we inhabit. Fear is an inescapable part of the human condition, a thread woven into the fabric of our existence. It is one of the most primal and universal emotions shared across cultures, eras, and individual lives. From the moment we are born, fear accompanies us, shaping our decisions, influencing our relationships, and coloring our understanding of the world. But fear is more than just a survival mechanism. It is a profound force that reveals the complexities of what it means to be human. At its core, fear is a response to vulnerability. It arises from our awareness of the fragility of life, the inevitability of death, and the uncertainty of the future. This awareness is uniquely human, setting us apart from other creatures. While animals experience fear in response to immediate threats, humans have the capacity to fear abstract concepts, failure, rejection, loneliness, and the unknown. This existential dimension of fear is what philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard and Martin Heidegger have explored in depth. Kierkegaard saw fear, or what he called anxiety, as a fundamental part of the human condition. For him, anxiety arises from the realization of our freedom and the infinite possibilities it entails. It is the dizziness of freedom, the unsettling awareness that we are responsible for our choices and their consequences. This fear, while terrifying, is also a gateway to self-awareness and authenticity. Heidegger took this idea further, arguing that fear is tied to our awareness of mortality. In his view, the fear of death is not just a fear of the end, but a reminder of the finitude of life. This awareness, which he called being toward death, shapes how we live and the meaning we assign to our existence. It forces us to confront the question, what does it mean to live a meaningful life in the face of inevitable death? For Heidegger, this confrontation with fear is essential to living authentically, as it compels us to take responsibility for our existence and make choices that reflect our true selves. Fear also plays a central role in how we relate to others and the world around us. On one hand, fear can isolate us, driving us to build walls, both literal and metaphorical, to protect ourselves from perceived threats. On the other, it can connect us, fostering empathy and solidarity in the face of shared dangers. For example, the fear of natural disasters or global crises often brings people together, highlighting our interdependence and the need for collective action. In this sense, fear is not just a personal experience, but a social one, shaping the bonds that hold communities together. Yet, fear is not without its paradoxes. While it can protect us, it can also imprison us, limiting our potential and distorting our perception of reality. Fear of failure might prevent us from pursuing our dreams. Fear of rejection might keep us from forming meaningful connections, and fear of the unknown might trap us in routines that feel safe but unfulfilling. This duality, fear as both a protector and a captor, lies at the heart of its complexity. Ultimately, fear is a mirror that reflects the human condition in all its beauty and fragility. It reminds us of our vulnerability, our mortality, and our capacity for both destruction and resilience. By confronting our fears, we can gain insight into ourselves and the world around us. We can learn to navigate uncertainty, to embrace vulnerability, and to find meaning in the face of adversity. Fear, in all its forms, is an integral part of what it means to be human. It is a challenge, a teacher, and a companion on the journey of life. Fear of the unknown is one of the most profound and universal human experiences. It is a fear that transcends cultures, eras, and individual lives, rooted in our innate desire for certainty and control. The unknown represents a vast and uncharted territory, a space where our knowledge ends and uncertainty begins. This boundary between the known and the unknown is where fear thrives, shaping not only our personal lives, but also our collective worldview. Philosophically, the fear of the unknown has been a central theme in existential thought. Soren Kierkegaard, for instance, saw this fear as a fundamental aspect of the human condition. He described it as anxiety, a diffuse and existential dread that arises from the awareness of our freedom and the infinite possibilities it entails. For Kierkegaard, this anxiety is not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced. It is the dizziness of freedom, the unsettling realization that we are responsible for our choices and their consequences. By confronting this fear, we can move beyond the safety of the familiar and live authentically, even in the face of uncertainty. Martin Heidegger expanded on this idea, linking the fear of the unknown to our awareness of mortality. In his view, the unknown is not just an external reality, but an internal one, the mystery of our own existence and its inevitable end. Heidegger argued that this awareness, which he called being toward death, shapes how we live and the meaning we assign to our lives. It forces us to confront the fundamental questions of existence. Who are we? What do we value? And how do we navigate a world that is inherently uncertain? For Heidegger, this confrontation with the unknown is essential to living authentically, as it compels us to take responsibility for our existence and make choices that reflect our true selves. The fear of the unknown also plays a significant role in shaping our worldview. On a personal level, it can lead to avoidance behaviors, where we cling to routines, beliefs, and relationships that feel safe but may limit our growth. This is evident in the way people often resist change, even when it holds the potential for positive transformation. Fear of the unknown can also manifest in broader societal trends, such as the rise of authoritarianism or the rejection of scientific advancements. When faced with uncertainty, people often seek comfort in rigid structures, clear answers, and familiar narratives, even if these come at the cost of freedom and progress. Yet, the unknown is not just a source of fear. It is also a source of wonder and possibility. Philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche celebrated the unknown as a space of creativity and transformation. Nietzsche's concept of the eternal recurrence challenges us to embrace the uncertainty of life, to live in such a way that we would willingly repeat every moment, even the painful ones. This radical acceptance of the unknown is a call to live boldly and authentically, to see uncertainty not as a threat, but as an opportunity for growth. In the modern world, the fear of the unknown is amplified by rapid technological and social changes. The digital age, with its constant flow of information and disinformation, creates a sense of instability and unpredictability. This can lead to a phenomenon known as future anxiety, where people feel overwhelmed by the pace of change and the uncertainty of what lies ahead. Yet, it also offers new ways to confront and understand the unknown. Advances in science, for example, continue to push the boundaries of human knowledge, transforming the unknown into the known and expanding our understanding of the universe. Ultimately, the fear of the unknown reveals the tension at the heart of the human condition, the desire for certainty in a world that is inherently uncertain. By confronting this fear, we can learn to navigate the unknown with curiosity and courage, transforming it from a source of dread into a space of possibility. As philosophers have shown, the unknown is not just a challenge, but a call to live fully and authentically, embracing the uncertainty of existence as an integral part of what it means to be human. Fear has long been a powerful tool for social and political control, wielded by leaders and institutions to shape behavior, enforce conformity, and maintain power. From ancient empires to modern democracies, fear has been used to manipulate populations, often under the guise of protection or security. This manipulation exploits one of the most primal human emotions, turning fear into a mechanism for control that can both unite and divide societies. Historically, fear has been a cornerstone of governance. In ancient Rome, for example, the principle of mitus hostilis, fear of the enemy, was used to unify the populace against external threats. Similarly, Machiavelli, in The Prince, famously argued that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, as fear is a more reliable motivator. He believed that fear, when carefully managed, could ensure loyalty and deter rebellion. This Machiavellian approach to fear as a tool of control has influenced political strategies for centuries, from absolute monarchies to authoritarian regimes. In the modern era, fear has been used to justify wars, surveillance, and the erosion of civil liberties. The Cold War, for instance, was defined by the fear of nuclear annihilation, a fear that governments on both sides of the Iron Curtain exploited to maintain control. Propaganda campaigns amplified this fear, creating a sense of existential threat that justified massive military spending and the suppression of dissent. Similarly, the post-9/11 era saw the rise of the War on Terror, where fear of terrorism was used to justify invasive security measures, such as mass surveillance and the curtailment of privacy rights. These examples illustrate how fear can be weaponized to create a climate of perpetual crisis, where the need for security outweighs concerns about freedom and justice. Leaders manipulate fear through various strategies, often relying on rhetoric, media, and symbolism. One common tactic is the creation of an other, a group or ideology portrayed as a threat to the social order. This could be a foreign enemy, a marginalized community, or a political opponent. By framing this other as dangerous, leaders can rally support, distract from internal problems, and justify oppressive policies. For example, authoritarian regimes often use fear of external invasion or internal subversion to justify crackdowns on dissent and the consolidation of power. Media and technology have amplified the reach and impact of fear-based manipulation. The 24-hour news cycle, social media, and digital algorithms are designed to capture attention, often by emphasizing threats and sensationalizing risks. This creates a phenomenon known as mean world syndrome, where people perceive the world as more dangerous than it actually is, leading to increased support for authoritarian measures and a willingness to sacrifice freedoms for safety. Leaders can exploit this by framing themselves as the only ones capable of providing protection, positioning fear as a justification for their authority. Philosophers have long critiqued the use of fear as a tool of control. Hannah Arendt, in her analysis of totalitarianism, argued that fear is central to the functioning of oppressive regimes. By creating a climate of constant insecurity, these regimes undermine trust and solidarity, making individuals more dependent on the state. Similarly, Michel Foucault explored how institutions use fear to discipline and regulate behavior, turning it into a mechanism of social control that operates not just through coercion, but through the internalization of norms and expectations. Yet, fear is not just a tool of oppression. It can also be a catalyst for resistance. Social movements often arise in response to fear. Fear of injustice, fear of loss, or fear of a future defined by inequality. The civil rights movement, for example, was driven by the fear of continued oppression, but it channeled that fear into collective action and demands for change. In this sense, fear can be both a weapon of control and a spark for liberation. Ultimately, the use of fear as a means of control reveals the delicate balance between security and freedom. While fear can unite and protect, it can also divide and oppress. The challenge lies in recognizing when fear is being manipulated and resisting the temptation to trade liberty for the illusion of safety. As history and philosophy show, true security comes not from the suppression of fear, but from the courage to confront it, to question its sources, and to build a society based on trust, justice, and shared humanity. Fear has long been a central theme in literature and art, serving as a mirror to the human condition and a canvas for exploring its philosophical dimensions. Through storytelling, imagery, and symbolism, these mediums capture the visceral intensity of fear while also delving into its deeper meanings, what it reveals about our vulnerabilities, our relationships, and our place in the world. From Gothic novels to surrealist paintings, fear in literature and art reflects and amplifies the philosophical questions that have preoccupied thinkers for centuries. In literature, fear often takes center stage in genres like horror, Gothic fiction, and dystopian narratives. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, for example, explores the fear of the unknown and the consequences of unchecked ambition. The novel's titular creature, a product of scientific experimentation, embodies the anxieties of a world grappling with rapid technological change. Shelley's work resonates with philosophical ideas about the limits of human knowledge and the dangers of playing God, themes that echo the existential dread explored by thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche. Similarly, Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis uses fear to explore themes of alienation and identity. The protagonist, Gregor Samsa, wakes up one day transformed into a giant insect, a surreal and terrifying experience that mirrors the existential fear of losing one's sense of self. Kafka's work reflects the philosophical tension between individuality and conformity, as well as the fear of being misunderstood or rejected by society. This aligns with Jean-Paul Sartre's ideas about the gaze of the other and how fear of judgment can constrain our freedom. In art, fear is often depicted through haunting imagery and symbolic representations. Francisco Goya's The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters is a powerful example. This etching, part of his series Los Caprichos, shows a man asleep at his desk, surrounded by menacing creatures. The work captures the fear of irrationality and chaos, suggesting that without reason, humanity is vulnerable to its darkest impulses. Goya's piece resonates with Enlightenment ideas about the importance of rationality, as well as the existential fear of losing control over one's mind and surroundings. Edvard Munch's iconic painting, The Scream, is another profound exploration of fear. The distorted figure, set against a swirling, blood-red sky, conveys a sense of existential terror, an overwhelming fear of the unknown and the fragility of existence. Munch's work reflects the philosophical anxieties of the modern era, particularly the sense of alienation and disconnection that arose with industrialization and urbanization. It echoes Martin Heidegger's concept of angst, a fundamental anxiety about being and the meaning of life. In contemporary literature and art, fear continues to evolve, reflecting new societal anxieties. Dystopian novels like Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale and films like Jordan Peele's Get Out use fear to critique social and political issues. Atwood's novel explores the fear of losing autonomy and individuality in a theocratic regime, while Peele's film delves into the fear of racial oppression and exploitation. These works align with modern philosophical critiques of power, identity, and systemic injustice, showing how fear can be both a personal and collective experience. Artists and writers also use fear to challenge and subvert societal norms. Surrealists like Salvador Dalí and René Magritte created unsettling, dreamlike images that evoke the fear of the irrational and the subconscious. Their works reflect the philosophical idea that fear is not just a response to external threats, but also an internal struggle, a confrontation with the unknown within ourselves. Ultimately, literature and art provide a unique lens through which to explore fear, capturing its emotional intensity while also engaging with its philosophical implications. These mediums remind us that fear is not just a personal emotion, but a universal experience, shaped by the cultural, historical, and existential contexts in which we live. By confronting fear through storytelling and imagery, we can better understand its role in our lives and its power to reveal the depths of what it means to be human. Trauma has a profound and lasting impact on how we perceive and experience fear. It reshapes the mind, often heightening sensitivity to threats and altering the way we navigate the world. For those who have experienced trauma, fear can become a constant companion, coloring every interaction and decision. This intersection of trauma and fear raises deep philosophical questions about the nature of suffering, the fragility of the human psyche, and the search for meaning in the face of overwhelming adversity. Psychologically, trauma disrupts the brain's normal fear response. The amygdala, which processes threats, becomes hyperactive, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought and decision-making, may struggle to regulate this heightened state. This imbalance can lead to conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, where fear becomes maladaptive, persisting long after the danger has passed. Trauma survivors often experience hypervigilance, flashbacks, and nightmares, as their minds remain trapped in the past, reliving the event that caused their pain. This altered perception of fear can make everyday life feel like a minefield, where even neutral stimuli can trigger intense emotional responses. Philosophically, trauma and fear are deeply intertwined with existential questions about suffering and meaning. Søren Kierkegaard, for instance, saw fear, or what he called anxiety, as a fundamental part of the human condition. For trauma survivors, this anxiety is often magnified, as the experience of trauma shatters their sense of safety and predictability. Kierkegaard believed that confronting this anxiety was essential to living authentically, as it forces us to grapple with the uncertainty and fragility of existence. For trauma survivors, this confrontation can be both terrifying and transformative, as they navigate the tension between their past pain and their present reality. Martin Heidegger's concept of being toward death also resonates with the experience of trauma. Trauma often brings individuals face to face with their own mortality, whether through a near-death experience or the loss of a loved one. This confrontation with death can create a profound existential fear, as survivors are forced to reckon with the impermanence of life and the inevitability of suffering. Heidegger argued that this awareness, while unsettling, is essential to living authentically. By confronting the reality of death, we can better appreciate the preciousness of life and the choices that define it. Existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir further explore the relationship between trauma and fear. Sartre's idea of bad faith is particularly relevant here. Trauma survivors may feel trapped by their past, defined by their pain, and unable to imagine a future free from fear. This sense of entrapment can lead to bad faith, where individuals deny their freedom and agency, allowing their trauma to dictate their lives. Sartre believed that true freedom lies in confronting this fear, in choosing to act despite the weight of the past. For trauma survivors, this can mean seeking therapy, building supportive relationships, or finding meaning in their suffering. Modern philosophers like Martha Nussbaum and Judith Herman have also addressed the impact of trauma on fear and identity. Nussbaum emphasizes the importance of narrative in healing, arguing that by telling their stories, trauma survivors can reclaim their agency and reshape their relationship with fear. Judith Herman, a psychiatrist and trauma expert, similarly highlights the role of connection and community in recovery. She argues that trauma isolates individuals, but healing often occurs in the context of relationships, where survivors can rebuild trust and find solidarity. Ultimately, trauma transforms fear from a fleeting emotion into a pervasive force, shaping how individuals perceive themselves and the world. Yet, philosophy offers a framework for understanding and confronting this fear. By grappling with the existential questions raised by trauma, questions about suffering, meaning, and freedom, survivors can begin to reclaim their lives. Trauma may leave scars, but it also opens the door to profound growth and resilience. As philosophers have shown, the journey through fear and trauma is not just about survival, but about finding meaning and authenticity in the face of life's deepest challenges. Fear is a universal human experience, but how we respond to it can transform its impact on our lives. Across cultures and traditions, philosophers and spiritual teachers have developed profound approaches to overcoming fear, offering tools to navigate its challenges and find inner peace. Stoicism, Buddhism, and mindfulness practices each provide unique insights into fear, emphasizing the power of reason, acceptance, and presence to transcend its grip. Stoicism, an ancient Greek philosophy, offers a practical framework for overcoming fear by focusing on what we can control and accepting what we cannot. The Stoics believed that fear arises from misplaced desires and attachments, our tendency to cling to external outcomes and fear their loss. Epictetus, a prominent Stoic philosopher, taught that while we cannot control external events, we can control our reactions to them. By cultivating rationality and self-discipline, we can reframe fear as an opportunity for growth rather than a threat. For example, instead of fearing failure, we can view it as a chance to learn and improve. This shift in perspective, known as cognitive reframing, lies at the heart of Stoic practice. Marcus Aurelius, another Stoic thinker, emphasized the importance of focusing on the present moment, reminding us that fear often stems from projecting ourselves into an uncertain future. By grounding ourselves in the here and now, we can reduce the power of fear over our lives. Buddhism approaches fear through the lens of impermanence and attachment. According to Buddhist teachings, fear arises from our resistance to change and our desire to hold on to what is fleeting. The Buddha taught that suffering, including fear, is rooted in attachment to people, possessions, and even our own identities. By practicing non-attachment, we can loosen fear's hold on us. Meditation and mindfulness are central to this process, helping us observe our fears without judgment or resistance. The practice of vipassana, insight meditation, for instance, encourages us to sit with our fears, examining their nature and recognizing their impermanence. Over time, this practice can lead to a deeper understanding of fear as a transient mental state, rather than an inherent truth. The Dalai Lama often speaks about the importance of compassion in overcoming fear, suggesting that by cultivating love and empathy for others, we can dissolve the self-centered anxieties that fuel fear. Mindfulness practices, which draw from both Buddhist traditions and modern psychology, offer another powerful approach to overcoming fear. Mindfulness involves paying attention to the present moment with openness and curiosity rather than judgment. When we practice mindfulness, we learn to observe our fears without becoming overwhelmed by them. This creates a sense of distance between ourselves and our fears, allowing us to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Jon Kabat-Zinn, a pioneer of mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, emphasizes the importance of being with our fears rather than trying to escape or suppress them. By acknowledging our fears and sitting with them, we can reduce their intensity and gain clarity about their origins. Mindfulness also helps us recognize that fear is not a fixed part of our identity, but a passing experience, much like a cloud in the sky. Despite their differences, Stoicism, Buddhism, and mindfulness share a common thread: the belief that fear can be transformed through awareness and intentionality. Stoicism teaches us to reframe fear through reason and self-discipline. Buddhism encourages us to let go of attachment and embrace impermanence, and mindfulness helps us cultivate presence and acceptance. Together, these approaches offer a roadmap for overcoming fear, not by eliminating it entirely, but by changing our relationship to it. Ultimately, fear is not an enemy to be defeated, but a teacher to be understood. By drawing on the wisdom of these traditions, we can learn to navigate fear with courage and grace, transforming it from a source of suffering into an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." By grounding ourselves in the present, embracing change, and cultivating inner resilience, we can move beyond fear and live more fully and authentically. Fear and desire are two of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior, often intertwined in ways that are both subtle and profound. While desire drives us toward what we want, fear holds us back from what we dread. Yet, these emotions are not opposites. They are deeply connected, each influencing the other in a dynamic interplay that shapes our wants, aspirations, and decisions. Understanding this relationship reveals much about the human condition and the complexities of our inner lives. At its core, desire is the longing for something, be it love, success, security, or meaning. Fear, on the other hand, is the anticipation of harm or loss. These emotions are often two sides of the same coin. For example, the desire for success is frequently accompanied by the fear of failure. The stronger our desire, the more intense our fear of not achieving it. This tension can be both motivating and paralyzing. On one hand, fear can push us to work harder, to strive for excellence, and to avoid mistakes. On the other, it can stifle creativity, discourage risk-taking, and trap us in cycles of self-doubt. Philosophers have long explored the relationship between fear and desire. The Stoics, for instance, believed that both emotions arise from our attachments to external outcomes. According to Epictetus, desire and fear are rooted in the belief that our happiness depends on things outside our control. When we desire something, we fear losing it. When we fear something, we desire to avoid it. The Stoic solution is to cultivate detachment, focusing instead on internal virtues like wisdom and self-discipline. By letting go of our attachment to outcomes, we can free ourselves from the tyranny of fear and desire. Buddhist philosophy takes this idea further, teaching that desire and fear are both forms of craving, tanha, that lead to suffering. The Buddha identified desire as the root of all suffering, but he also recognized that fear is often a byproduct of desire. When we cling to what we want, we become afraid of losing it. When we resist what we fear, we become trapped in a cycle of aversion. The path to liberation, according to Buddhism, lies in overcoming both desire and fear through mindfulness, compassion, and the realization of impermanence. By recognizing that all things are transient, we can loosen the grip of fear and desire on our lives. Existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Soren Kierkegaard offer a different perspective, emphasizing the role of freedom and responsibility in the interplay of fear and desire. Sartre argued that desire is an expression of our freedom, a way of projecting ourselves into the future and creating meaning. Yet, this freedom also brings with it the fear of choice and the burden of responsibility. Kierkegaard described this tension as the dizziness of freedom, the anxiety that arises when we confront the infinite possibilities of our existence. For existentialists, the challenge is to embrace this freedom, to act on our desires despite our fears, and to take responsibility for the choices that define our lives. In modern psychology, the relationship between fear and desire is often explored through the lens of motivation and behavior. Fear of failure, for instance, can either motivate us to work harder or paralyze us into inaction. Similarly, fear of rejection can shape our desires for connection and belonging, leading us to seek approval or avoid vulnerability. These dynamics are evident in everything from career aspirations to personal relationships, where fear and desire often operate in tandem, driving our decisions and shaping our identities. Ultimately, The relationship between fear and desire reveals the complexity of human motivation. Fear can both fuel and hinder our desires, just as desire can amplify or mitigate our fears. By understanding this interplay, we can better navigate the challenges of life, making choices that align with our values and aspirations, rather than being driven by unconscious fears. As philosophers and spiritual teachers have shown, the key lies in cultivating self-awareness, embracing our freedom, and finding balance between what we want and what we fear. In doing so, we can move beyond the limitations of fear and desire, living more authentically and fully. Collective fear is a powerful force that shapes societies, influencing everything from politics and culture to individual behavior. Unlike personal fear, which arises from individual experiences, collective fear is shared by a group, often rooted in perceived threats to the community's safety, identity, or way of life. This shared emotion can unite people, creating solidarity in the face of danger. But it can also be manipulated, leading to division, scapegoating, and the erosion of trust. Understanding collective fear requires examining how it emerges, how it spreads, and how it impacts societies. One of the most striking features of collective fear is its ability to amplify individual anxieties. When fear is shared, it gains momentum, becoming more intense and pervasive than it might be for any one person. This amplification often occurs through social and cultural channels, such as media, storytelling, and group rituals. For example, during times of crisis, whether a pandemic, a natural disaster, or a terrorist attack, fear spreads rapidly through news coverage, social media, and word of mouth. The constant stream of information, often sensationalized, can create a sense of impending doom, even if the actual risk is relatively low. This phenomenon, known as emotional contagion, illustrates how fear can ripple through a society, shaping collective behavior and attitudes. Historically, collective fear has been used as a tool for social and political control. Leaders and institutions often exploit fear to unify populations, justify policies, or suppress dissent. In ancient Rome, the principle of metus hostilis, fear of the enemy, was used to rally citizens against external threats. Similarly, during the Cold War, fear of nuclear annihilation was used to justify massive military spending and the suppression of political opposition. More recently, the war on terror has been characterized by the strategic use of fear to garner support for invasive security measures and military interventions. These examples highlight how collective fear can be weaponized, turning a natural human emotion into a mechanism for control. Philosophers and social theorists have long examined the dynamics of collective fear. Hannah Arendt, in her analysis of totalitarianism, argued that fear is central to the functioning of oppressive regimes. By creating a climate of constant insecurity, these regimes undermine trust and solidarity, making individuals more dependent on the state. Similarly, Michel Foucault explored how institutions use fear to discipline and regulate behavior, turning it into a mechanism of social control that operates not just through coercion, but through the internalization of norms and expectations. Yet, collective fear is not always destructive. It can also serve as a catalyst for positive change, uniting people around a common cause. The civil rights movement in the United States, for example, was driven by the collective fear of continued oppression and the desire for a more just society. Similarly, Global movements addressing climate change are fueled by the shared fear of environmental collapse and the hope for a sustainable future. In these cases, collective fear is channeled into collective action, transforming anxiety into empowerment. The rise of digital technology has added new dimensions to collective fear. Social media platforms, with their algorithms designed to maximize engagement, often amplify fear by prioritizing sensational or alarming content. This can create echo chambers, where fear is reinforced and exaggerated, leading to phenomena like moral panics or the spread of conspiracy theories. The COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, saw an explosion of fear-driven misinformation, from false cures to exaggerated claims about the virus's origins. This digital amplification of fear underscores the need for critical thinking and media literacy in navigating the modern information landscape. Ultimately, collective fear reveals the interconnectedness of human experience. It shows how individual emotions are shaped by social contexts and how shared anxieties can influence the course of history. By understanding the mechanisms of collective fear, we can better recognize when it is being manipulated and how to channel it constructively. Whether through solidarity, critical awareness, or collective action, societies have the power to transform fear from a source of division into a force for resilience and change. Modern technology has transformed nearly every aspect of our lives, including how we experience and respond to fear. From surveillance systems and artificial intelligence to social media algorithms, technology shapes our anxieties in ways that are both subtle and profound. While these advancements offer unprecedented convenience and connectivity, they also raise deep philosophical questions about privacy, autonomy, and the nature of human existence in an increasingly digital world. One of the most pervasive ways technology influences fear is through surveillance. Governments and corporations collect vast amounts of data on individuals, often without their full knowledge or consent. This constant monitoring can create a sense of unease as people feel their every move is being watched. The fear of surveillance is not just about privacy, it's about autonomy. When we know we are being watched, we may alter our behavior, conforming to perceived expectations rather than acting authentically. This phenomenon, known as the panoptic effect, was explored by philosopher Michel Foucault, who argued that surveillance is a tool of social control, shaping behavior through the internalization of norms. In the digital age, this control extends beyond physical spaces into the virtual realm, where algorithms track our online activities and predict our preferences, often without our awareness. Artificial intelligence, AI, adds another layer to this dynamic. While AI has the potential to revolutionize industries and improve lives, it also raises fears about job displacement, bias, and the loss of human agency. The idea of machines making decisions that affect our lives, whether in healthcare, criminal justice, or finance, can be unsettling. Philosophers like Nick Bostrom have explored the ethical implications of AI, particularly the fear of superintelligent systems that could surpass human control. This existential risk raises questions about the limits of human ingenuity and the moral responsibilities of creating technologies that could outpace our understanding. Social media, perhaps more than any other technology, amplifies and shapes our fears. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are designed to capture attention, often by prioritizing sensational or emotionally charged content. This can create a feedback loop of fear, where algorithms push alarming news stories, conspiracy theories, and divisive rhetoric to the top of our feeds. The result is a phenomenon known as doom scrolling, where users compulsively consume negative content, leading to heightened anxiety and a distorted perception of reality. Social media also fosters fear of missing out, FOMO, and fear of judgment, as users compare their lives to curated, idealized versions of others. These fears can erode self-esteem and contribute to mental health issues, raising questions about the ethical responsibilities of tech companies and the impact of their design choices on society. The intersection of fear and technology also raises philosophical questions about identity and authenticity. In a world where our online personas are carefully curated and our behaviors are shaped by algorithms, what does it mean to be truly ourselves? Philosophers like Jean Baudrillard have explored the concept of hyperreality, where the line between the real and the virtual becomes blurred. In this context, fear is not just a response to external threats, but a reflection of our struggle to maintain a sense of self in a digitally mediated world. Moreover, technology challenges our understanding of human agency. When algorithms influence our decisions, from what we buy to who we vote for, to what extent are we still free? This question resonates with existentialist ideas about freedom and responsibility. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free, meaning we must take responsibility for our choices. But in a world where technology increasingly shapes those choices, the concept of freedom becomes more complex. Are we truly free if our decisions are guided by algorithms designed to manipulate our behavior? Ultimately, the relationship between fear and technology reveals the dual nature of progress. While technology offers incredible opportunities, it also introduces new vulnerabilities and ethical dilemmas. By examining these issues through a philosophical lens, we can better understand the impact of technology on our lives and the responsibilities that come with its use. As we navigate this digital landscape, the challenge is to harness technology's potential while safeguarding our autonomy, privacy, and humanity. The fear of death is one of the most universal and profound human experiences, shaping how we live, think, and relate to the world. It is a fear that transcends cultures and eras, rooted in our awareness of mortality and the unknown that lies beyond. Philosophers have long grappled with this fear, offering diverse perspectives on its meaning and how to confront it. From ancient thinkers to modern existentialists, these reflections reveal the complexity of our relationship with death and its implications for life. Ancient Greek philosophers like Epicurus and the Stoics approached the fear of death with a focus on rationality and acceptance. Epicurus argued that death is nothing to fear because it is simply the absence of sensation. In his famous words, "When we exist, death is not, and when death exists, we are not." By reframing death as a natural and inevitable part of life, Epicurus sought to liberate people from the anxiety it causes. The Stoics, like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, similarly emphasized the importance of accepting death as part of the natural order. They believed that fear of death stems from our attachment to life and our desire to control the uncontrollable. By cultivating detachment and focusing on virtue, the Stoics argued, we can face death with equanimity. In contrast, existentialist philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard and Martin Heidegger saw the fear of death as an essential aspect of the human condition. Kierkegaard described this fear as dread, a profound anxiety that arises from the awareness of our freedom and the inevitability of death. For Kierkegaard, this dread is not something to be overcome, but something to be embraced, as it reveals the depth of our existence and the urgency of our choices. Heidegger, in his seminal work, Being and Time, argued that the awareness of death, what he called being toward death, is central to living authentically. By confronting our mortality, we can fully appreciate the finitude of life and take responsibility for how we live. Heidegger believed that this confrontation with death is what gives life its meaning and urgency. Jean-Paul Sartre, another existentialist, approached the fear of death through the lens of freedom and responsibility. Sartre argued that death is the ultimate limit of our freedom, the point at which our possibilities end. Yet, he also believed that this limit gives life its significance. By recognizing that our time is finite, we are compelled to make meaningful choices and take responsibility for our existence. Sartre's view challenges us to see death not as a source of fear, but as a call to live authentically and fully. In Eastern philosophy, the fear of death is often addressed through the concept of impermanence. Buddhism, for example, teaches that attachment to life and fear of death are rooted in ignorance of the true nature of reality. The Buddha encouraged his followers to meditate on death as a way of cultivating mindfulness and letting go of attachment. By recognizing the impermanence of all things, including ourselves, we can reduce the fear of death and live more peacefully. Similarly, in Taoism, death is seen as a natural transition, part of the eternal cycle of yin and yang. The Taoist sage Zhuangzi famously quipped, "How do I know that loving life is not a delusion? How do I know that in hating death I am not like a child who has lost his way?" Modern philosophers like Ernest Becker have explored the fear of death through the lens of psychology and culture. In his book, The Denial of Death, Becker argues that much of human behavior is driven by the need to escape the terror of mortality. We create cultural symbols, pursue achievements, and seek immortality through legacy as ways of coping with our fear. Becker's work highlights the profound impact of death anxiety on human culture and individuality, suggesting that our fear of death is both a source of creativity and a barrier to self-awareness. Ultimately, the fear of death reveals the tension at the heart of the human condition, the desire for meaning in a finite existence. Whether through acceptance, confrontation, or transcendence, philosophers have shown that this fear can be a powerful catalyst for reflection and growth. By engaging with the fear of death, we can deepen our understanding of life, embrace our freedom, and live with greater purpose and authenticity. Change is an inevitable part of life, yet it often evokes deep-seated fear. Whether it's personal transformation, such as a career shift or the end of a relationship, or societal upheaval, like technological advancements or political revolutions, change disrupts the familiar and forces us into the unknown. This fear of the unknown is a natural response, rooted in our desire for stability and control. However, it can also paralyze us, preventing growth and adaptation. Philosophers have long explored the nature of fear in the face of change, offering insights that can help us navigate these anxieties with greater clarity and resilience. At the heart of the fear of change is the fear of loss. When circumstances shift, we risk losing what we know and value, our routines, relationships, or sense of identity. This fear is particularly evident in times of societal change, such as the Industrial Revolution or the digital age, where rapid advancements disrupt traditional ways of life. For individuals, personal changes like moving to a new city or starting a family can trigger similar anxieties. The fear of losing control or failing to adapt can be overwhelming, leading to resistance or avoidance. Philosophers like Heraclitus, the ancient Greek thinker, recognized change as a fundamental aspect of existence. His famous dictum, "No man ever steps in the same river twice," underscores the constant flux of life. Heraclitus saw change not as something to fear, but as the essence of reality. By embracing this perspective, we can begin to see change as an opportunity for growth rather than a threat. This aligns with Stoic philosophy, which teaches that while we cannot control external events, we can control our responses to them. Epictetus, a prominent Stoic, advised focusing on what is within our power, our thoughts, attitudes, and actions, rather than clinging to the illusion of stability. By cultivating resilience and adaptability, we can face change with greater equanimity. Existentialist philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard and Jean-Paul Sartre offer a different lens through which to view the fear of change. Kierkegaard saw fear, or what he called anxiety, as a natural response to the infinite possibilities of freedom. Change, in this sense, forces us to confront our freedom and the responsibility of making choices. While this can be terrifying, Kierkegaard believed it is also a gateway to self-awareness and authenticity. Sartre similarly emphasized the importance of embracing change as an expression of our freedom. He argued that resisting change is a form of bad faith, where we deny our ability to shape our own lives. By accepting the uncertainty of change, we can live more authentically and fully. Buddhist philosophy provides another valuable perspective, emphasizing impermanence as a core truth of existence. The Buddha taught that attachment to the familiar and resistance to change are sources of suffering. By practicing mindfulness and non-attachment, we can learn to accept change as a natural part of life. This doesn't mean we should be indifferent to loss or upheaval, but rather that we can approach change with a sense of openness and curiosity rather than fear. The practice of meditation, for instance, helps us observe our fears without being overwhelmed by them, fostering a sense of inner stability even in the face of external change. Modern philosophers like Martha Nussbaum have also explored the emotional dimensions of change. In her work on the fragility of goodness, Nussbaum argues that fear of change is tied to our vulnerability as human beings. We fear change because it reminds us of our lack of control and the unpredictability of life. Yet, Nussbaum suggests that embracing this vulnerability can lead to greater compassion and connection. By acknowledging our shared fragility, we can build stronger communities and support systems to navigate change together. Ultimately, the fear of change reveals the tension between our desire for stability and the inevitability of flux. Philosophical insights from Heraclitus, the Stoics, existentialists, and Buddhist thinkers remind us that change is not something to be feared, but an integral part of life. By cultivating resilience, embracing our freedom, and practicing mindfulness, we can navigate change with greater courage and grace. In doing so, we transform fear from a barrier into a catalyst for growth, finding meaning and purpose in the ever-shifting landscape of existence. Fear is a paradoxical emotion, capable of driving both constructive and destructive outcomes. On one hand, it can paralyze us, trapping us in cycles of avoidance and anxiety. On the other, it can propel us to action, sharpening our focus and pushing us to overcome challenges. This duality lies at the heart of fear's complexity, revealing its power to shape our lives in profound and often contradictory ways. At its core, fear is a survival mechanism, hardwired into our biology to protect us from danger. When faced with a threat, fear triggers the fight or flight response, heightening our senses and preparing us to react. This can be life-saving in moments of immediate danger, such as escaping a predator or avoiding an accident. Yet, fear's protective function can also become maladaptive. When fear is disproportionate or persistent, such as in phobias or chronic anxiety, it can hinder our ability to function, limiting our potential and distorting our perception of reality. This is the paradox of fear. It can both protect and imprison us. Philosophically, this paradox has been explored by thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard and Jean-Paul Sartre. Kierkegaard saw fear, or what he called anxiety, as a fundamental aspect of the human condition. He described it as the dizziness of freedom, the unsettling awareness of our ability to make choices, and the uncertainty of their outcomes. For Kierkegaard, this anxiety is both a source of dread and a catalyst for growth. It forces us to confront the possibilities of our existence, pushing us to live authentically rather than clinging to the safety of conformity. In this sense, fear is not just a barrier, but a gateway to self-awareness and transformation. Sartre expanded on this idea, arguing that fear often arises from the burden of freedom. When we recognize our ability to shape our lives, we also confront the responsibility of our choices. This can be terrifying, leading some to retreat into bad faith, where they deny their freedom and allow fear to dictate their actions. Yet, Sartre believed that embracing this fear is essential to living authentically. By confronting our fears, we can take ownership of our lives and make choices that reflect our true selves. This tension between fear and freedom highlights the paradoxical nature of fear. It can both constrain and liberate us. In practical terms, fear's dual nature is evident in how it influences behavior. Fear of failure, for instance, can be paralyzing, preventing us from taking risks or pursuing our goals. Yet, it can also be motivating, driving us to work harder and prepare more thoroughly. Similarly, fear of rejection can lead to social withdrawal, but it can also inspire us to build deeper, more meaningful connections. The outcome often depends on how we respond to fear, whether we allow it to control us or use it as a catalyst for growth. The Stoics offer a useful framework for navigating this paradox. They believed that fear arises from our attachment to external outcomes and our desire to control the uncontrollable. By cultivating rationality and detachment, we can reframe fear as an opportunity for growth rather than a threat. For example, instead of fearing failure, we can view it as a chance to learn and improve. This shift in perspective allows us to harness fear's motivating power while reducing its capacity to paralyze us. Modern psychology also recognizes the paradoxical nature of fear. Exposure therapy, for instance, is based on the idea that confronting our fears can reduce their power over us. By gradually facing what we fear, we can build resilience and gain a sense of control. This aligns with the philosophical insight that fear, when confronted, can be a source of empowerment rather than limitation. Ultimately, the paradox of fear lies in its ability to both hinder and inspire us. It is a reminder of our vulnerability and our strength, our limitations and our potential. By understanding this duality, we can learn to navigate fear with greater awareness and intentionality. Whether through philosophical reflection, psychological techniques, or personal resilience, we can transform fear from a source of suffering into a force for growth. In doing so, we embrace the full complexity of what it means to be human, finding meaning and purpose in the face of life's uncertainties. Fear and authenticity are deeply intertwined, as fear often stands as a barrier to living truthfully and expressing our genuine selves. Authenticity, the act of being true to one's own values, desires, and identity, requires courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to defy societal expectations. Yet, fear of judgment, rejection, or failure can stifle this process, leading us to conform to external pressures rather than embracing our inner truth. This tension between societal expectations and personal authenticity is a central theme in philosophy, revealing the challenges and rewards of living authentically in a world that often prioritizes conformity. At the heart of this tension is the fear of judgment. From a young age, we are socialized to seek approval and avoid disapproval, whether from family, peers, or society at large. This fear of being judged can lead us to suppress aspects of ourselves that don't align with societal norms, creating a divide between our public persona and our private self. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre have explored this dynamic through the concept of bad faith, where individuals deny their freedom and authenticity to conform to external expectations. In doing so, they betray their true selves, living inauthentically to avoid the discomfort of judgment or rejection. The fear of judgment is particularly potent in the age of social media, where our lives are constantly on display. Platforms like Instagram and Facebook encourage us to curate idealized versions of ourselves, amplifying the pressure to conform and the fear of falling short. This performative authenticity can create a paradox. The more we strive to present ourselves authentically, the more we may feel trapped by the need to meet external standards. Philosophers like Charles Taylor have argued that modern society's emphasis on individualism and self-expression can ironically lead to greater conformity as we seek validation through likes, shares, and followers. Existentialist thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard and Martin Heidegger offer insights into the relationship between fear and authenticity. Kierkegaard saw fear, or what he called anxiety, as a necessary part of the journey toward self-awareness. He believed that anxiety arises from the awareness of our freedom and the infinite possibilities it entails. While this can be terrifying, Kierkegaard argued that confronting this fear is essential to living authentically. By embracing the uncertainty of our choices, we can move beyond societal expectations and define ourselves on our own terms. Heidegger similarly emphasized the importance of confronting fear to live authentically. In his view, the awareness of our mortality, what he called being toward death, forces us to confront the finitude of life and take responsibility for our existence. This confrontation with fear, while unsettling, is what gives life its meaning and urgency. The tension between societal expectations and personal truth is also evident in the work of feminist philosophers like Simone de Beauvoir. In The Second Sex, de Beauvoir explores how societal norms and gender roles constrain women's ability to live authentically. The fear of deviating from these norms, of being labeled too ambitious, too emotional, or too independent, can prevent individuals from pursuing their true desires and potential. De Beauvoir's call for women to transcend these limitations and define themselves on their own terms resonates with the broader philosophical challenge of living authentically in the face of fear. Overcoming the fear of judgment requires self-awareness, courage, and a willingness to embrace vulnerability. Philosophers like Brené Brown have highlighted the importance of vulnerability in cultivating authenticity. Brown argues that vulnerability, the willingness to show up and be seen, even when there are no guarantees, is the birthplace of creativity, connection, and genuine self-expression. By embracing vulnerability, we can confront our fears and live more authentically, even in the face of societal pressures. Ultimately, the journey toward authenticity is a deeply personal and often challenging one. It requires us to confront our fears, question societal norms, and take responsibility for our choices. Yet, as philosophers have shown, the rewards of living authentically are profound. By embracing our true selves, we can find greater meaning, connection, and fulfillment, transforming fear from a barrier into a catalyst for growth. In a world that often prioritizes conformity, the courage to be authentic is both a radical act and a profound expression of our humanity. Fear plays a significant role in parenting, shaping how adults raise their children and the values they instill in them. Whether it's the fear of harm, failure, or societal judgment, these anxieties influence parenting styles and decisions, often with profound implications for a child's development and worldview. Philosophically, the use of fear in parenting raises important questions about autonomy, morality, and the balance between protection and control. One of the most common fears in parenting is the fear of physical or emotional harm to the child. This fear can lead to overprotective behaviors, such as restricting a child's independence or shielding them from failure. While these actions are often well-intentioned, they can hinder a child's ability to develop resilience and problem-solving skills. Philosophers like John Locke, who emphasized the importance of experience in shaping the mind, would argue that children need opportunities to explore, make mistakes, and learn from them. Overprotection, driven by fear, can deprive children of these essential experiences, limiting their growth and autonomy. Another fear that influences parenting is the fear of societal judgment. Parents may feel pressured to raise their children in ways that conform to cultural or social norms, whether it's excelling academically, adhering to gender roles, or fitting into a particular social group. This fear of judgment can lead to authoritarian or overly controlling parenting styles, where the child's individuality is suppressed in favor of meeting external expectations. Philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who championed the idea of natural development, would critique this approach, arguing that children should be allowed to grow according to their own nature, rather than being molded to fit societal ideals. The use of fear as a disciplinary tool is another area of concern. Some parents instill fear in their children, whether through threats, punishment, or emotional manipulation, to enforce obedience or moral behavior. While this may produce short-term compliance, it can have long-term consequences for the child's emotional and psychological well-being. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who emphasized the importance of moral autonomy, would argue that true ethical behavior arises from internal principles, not external coercion. Instilling fear as a means of control undermines a child's ability to develop their own moral compass and sense of responsibility. Modern psychologists and philosophers, such as Alice Miller, have explored the psychological impact of fear-based parenting. In her work, The Drama of the Gifted Child, Miller argues that children who grow up in environments dominated by fear and control often internalize these dynamics, leading to struggles with self-esteem, authenticity, and emotional expression later in life. This aligns with the philosophical idea that fear, when used excessively, can distort a child's sense of self and their relationship with the world. On the other hand, fear can also play a constructive role in parenting when approached thoughtfully. For example, teaching children to recognize and navigate real dangers, such as crossing the street safely or understanding personal boundaries, can empower them to make informed decisions. The key lies in balancing protection with trust, allowing children to develop confidence and independence. Philosophers like Maria Montessori, who emphasized the importance of fostering a child's natural curiosity and independence, would advocate for a parenting style that guides rather than controls, empowering children to explore the world with a sense of security and curiosity. Ultimately, the philosophy of fear in parenting highlights the delicate balance between protection and autonomy. While fear is a natural and often necessary part of parenting, it must be tempered with wisdom and self-awareness. By reflecting on their own fears and their impact on their children, parents can create an environment that fosters resilience, authenticity, and moral growth. In doing so, they help their children navigate the complexities of life with courage and curiosity, transforming fear from a source of limitation into a catalyst for empowerment. Fear and power are deeply intertwined, with fear often serving as a tool to establish, maintain, and reinforce authority. Whether in the context of governments, institutions, or personal relationships, fear can be wielded to control behavior, suppress dissent, and consolidate power. This dynamic raises important philosophical and ethical questions about the nature of authority, the role of fear in society, and the consequences of using fear as a mechanism of control. Historically, fear has been a cornerstone of governance. Ancient rulers and empires often relied on fear to maintain order and loyalty. For example, in Machiavelli's The Prince, fear is explicitly endorsed as a more effective tool for maintaining power than love. Machiavelli argued that while love can be fickle, fear is a more reliable motivator because it is rooted in self-preservation. This pragmatic approach to fear as a tool of control has influenced political strategies for centuries, from absolute monarchies to modern authoritarian regimes. Institutions and governments often use fear to justify their authority and policies. One common tactic is the creation of an other, a group or ideology portrayed as a threat to societal stability. This could be a foreign enemy, a marginalized community, or a political opponent. By framing this other as dangerous, leaders can rally support, distract from internal problems, and justify oppressive measures. For example, during the Cold War, fear of communism was used to justify McCarthyism in the United States, leading to widespread surveillance, blacklisting, and the suppression of civil liberties. Similarly, the War on Terror has been characterized by the strategic use of fear to garner support for military interventions and domestic surveillance programs. Philosophers like Michel Foucault have explored how institutions use fear to discipline and regulate behavior. In his work, Discipline and Punish, Foucault examines how fear operates not just through overt coercion, but through the internalization of norms and expectations. Institutions like prisons, schools, and hospitals use fear of punishment, failure, or illness to shape behavior and maintain control. This disciplinary power operates subtly, often without the need for direct force, as individuals regulate themselves out of fear of consequences. Fear is also a tool in personal power dynamics. In relationships, whether familial, professional, or romantic, fear can be used to manipulate and control. This might involve threats, emotional manipulation, or the exploitation of vulnerabilities. Philosophers like Simone de Beauvoir have highlighted how fear is often used to maintain patriarchal power structures, where women are socialized to fear independence or assertiveness, keeping them subordinate. Similarly, in workplaces, fear of job loss or reprimand can be used to enforce compliance and suppress dissent. Yet, the use of fear as a tool of power is not without its consequences. While it can produce short-term compliance, it often erodes trust, creativity, and genuine cooperation. Fear-based systems tend to foster resentment and resistance as individuals and groups push back against control. Philosophers like Hannah Arendt have warned about the dangers of fear in politics, arguing that it undermines democracy by eroding trust and solidarity. In her analysis of totalitarianism, Arendt shows how fear is used to isolate individuals, making them more dependent on the state and less likely to challenge authority. Ultimately, the relationship between fear and power reveals the dual nature of authority. While fear can be an effective tool for control, it is also a fragile and destructive one. By relying on fear, institutions and individuals risk creating environments of mistrust and oppression, where genuine progress and collaboration are stifled. Philosophers and thinkers across disciplines remind us that true authority is not rooted in fear, but in trust, respect, and shared values. By fostering these qualities, we can build systems of power that empower rather than control, transforming fear from a tool of domination into a catalyst for collective growth and resilience. The fear of being forgotten, of leaving no lasting mark on the world, is a deeply existential concern that has preoccupied humans for centuries. This fear of obscurity touches on our desire for meaning, our awareness of mortality, and our longing to transcend the limits of our finite existence. Philosophers, writers, and thinkers across cultures have grappled with this fear, offering diverse perspectives on legacy, memory, and how we might find solace in the face of impermanence. At its core, the fear of being forgotten reflects our struggle with mortality. The awareness that our lives are fleeting and that we will one day be erased from memory can be profoundly unsettling. This fear is not just about death, but about the erasure of our identity, our achievements, and our connections to others. It raises questions about what it means to live a meaningful life and how we can ensure that our existence leaves a lasting impact. Ancient philosophies often addressed this fear by emphasizing the pursuit of virtue and the creation of a legacy that outlives the individual. For example, the Stoics believed that true fulfillment comes from living in accordance with reason and virtue rather than seeking external validation or fame. Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor, wrote extensively about the impermanence of life and the futility of seeking immortality through legacy. He argued that what matters is not how long we are remembered, but how well we live. By focusing on inner virtue and ethical living, we can find peace in the knowledge that our actions have intrinsic value, regardless of whether they are remembered. In contrast, other philosophies and traditions have embraced the idea of legacy as a way to transcend mortality. Ancient Egyptian culture, for instance, placed great importance on preserving memory through monumental architecture, such as the pyramids, and elaborate burial practices. The belief in an afterlife and the preservation of one's name and deeds were central to their understanding of immortality. Similarly, in Confucian philosophy, the concept of li, ritual, emphasizes the importance of honoring ancestors and maintaining family lineage, ensuring that one's memory lives on through future generations. Existentialist thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus offer a different perspective on the fear of being forgotten. Sartre argued that life has no inherent meaning. It is up to us to create our own purpose through our choices and actions. In this view, the fear of obscurity is a reflection of our desire to impose meaning on an indifferent universe. Sartre believed that true freedom lies in accepting this indifference and finding fulfillment in the act of living authentically rather than seeking validation through legacy. Camus, in his essay The Myth of Sisyphus, similarly rejected the pursuit of immortality, arguing that the struggle itself, the act of living and creating, is what gives life meaning, even if our efforts are ultimately forgotten. Modern philosophies and psychological perspectives also address the fear of being forgotten. Psychologist Ernest Becker, in his book The Denial of Death, argued that much of human behavior is driven by the need to transcend mortality and avoid the terror of being forgotten. We create cultural symbols, pursue achievements, and seek immortality through legacy as ways of coping with this fear. Becker's work highlights the profound impact of this existential anxiety on human culture and individuality, suggesting that our fear of obscurity is both a source of creativity and a barrier to self-awareness. Ultimately, the fear of being forgotten reveals the tension between our desire for permanence and the inevitability of impermanence. While some philosophies encourage us to seek solace in inner virtue or the act of living authentically, others suggest that legacy and memory can provide a sense of continuity and connection. By reflecting on these perspectives, we can better understand our own fears and aspirations, finding ways to live meaningfully in the face of life's transience. Whether through the pursuit of virtue, the creation of art, or the nurturing of relationships, we can transform the fear of obscurity into a motivation to live fully and authentically, leaving a legacy that resonates not in the permanence of memory, but in the richness of our lived experience.